In the dead of night, under the pale light of the moon, shadowy figures crept between headstones. With shovels in hand and coin in mind, they unearthed the freshly dead, not for witchcraft or revenge, but for science, or so they claimed. This is the untold story of the doctors, anatomists, and hired thieves who built modern medicine on a foundation of stolen corpses. What you're about to hear is not fiction. It's a horrifyingly true chapter of medical history that universities and textbooks would rather forget. Welcome to Dr. Pox's Medical Mysteries. The 1800s were a time of surgical revolution. For centuries, doctors had relied on guesswork, hearsay, and ancient texts. But now, the medical profession was starting to demand evidence, and that meant human anatomy. In Britain, the number of formal medical schools exploded. Between 1750 and 1825, over 30 new teaching hospitals were established. Students were taught to perform live dissections, not just read about the human body in dusty Gaelic tomes. But there was a major catch. Under the law, the only legal source of cadavers in England was the Murder Act of 1752. That act allowed the bodies of executed criminals to be dissected as a further punishment after death. It was meant to deter crime, not support science. At the time, Britain executed fewer than 100 people per year, while thousands of anatomy students filled the lecture halls. Medical education was booming. Legal cadavers were not. Thus, a new market emerged, and where there's a demand, supply soon follows. At one point in the early 1800s, London medical schools needed 500 bodies per year to train students, but the state only provided around 50. So, they turned to the black market, because of course. Enter the Resurrection Men, also known as body snatchers. They were the link between the dead and the dissecting table. These men were not always criminals in the traditional sense. Many were poor laborers, former soldiers, even medical students themselves, eager to earn a few pounds. Resurrectionists worked fast, quietly, and with a level of efficiency that bordered on the industrial. They often had lookouts, insiders in hospitals, and direct relationships with professors, especially in cities like London, Dublin, Edinburgh, and New York. Some even carried forged documents claiming they had permission from the family or the church, just in case they were caught. Here's how they operated. Graves were targeted within 24 to 72 hours of burial, before decomposition set in. They used wooden spades to reduce noise and dug only at the head of the grave. Once the coffin was exposed, they'd break the lid, tie a rope under the arms of the corpse, and pull it out. Clothes and valuables were removed and left behind, because stealing those was a felony, but the body? That was a legal gray area. Some were caught, sure, but many were protected by bribes or a don't ask, don't tell attitude by universities. When word of this gruesome profession came to light, the public was understandably horrified. Word began to spread of loved ones buried one day and gone the next. Newspapers printed lurid accounts of grave robbers being chased by torch-wielding mobs. Families responded with desperate measures. Coffins were reinforced with iron cages called mort safes, a literal iron cage bolted over the grave. Some families hired armed guards to patrol cemeteries. Some graves were booby-trapped with tripwires and even firearms. Some communities formed watch societies that would patrol graveyards after dark. Other communities constructed watchtowers in their local graveyards to keep an eye out for clandestine activities. In some cases, families took turns sleeping on top of the grave, waiting until the body was decayed enough to be useless. And it wasn't paranoia. One estimate suggests that in the early 1800s in Edinburgh alone, hundreds of graves were disturbed each year. And the fear wasn't just practical, it was also spiritual. Many Victorians believed that if a body was mutilated after death, the soul could not reach heaven. Regardless, the practice continued, because the money was just too good. Then came William Burke and William Hare, names that would redefine horror in 1828 Edinburgh. The city was a global hub for medical education, and Dr. Robert Knox, a prominent anatomist, had a reputation for paying handsomely for fresh corpses. Burke and Hare weren't resurrectionists in a traditional sense. They discovered it was simply easier to kill than to dig. Their first victim? An elderly tenant of Hare's lodging house who died of natural causes. When they sold the body to Knox, they saw the profit and made a terrible decision. Over the course of a year, they murdered 16 people, including a mentally ill man known as Daft Jamie, a young woman named Mary Docherty, several travelers, drunks, and of course the destitute. They used a suffocation technique now known as burking, sitting on the chest while covering the mouth and nose, leaving no obvious signs of violence. Dr. Knox never reported his suspicions. In fact, he praised the freshness of the corpses. Eventually, the pair were discovered and arrested after neighbors grew suspicious. Hare turned King's evidence, and Burke was hanged. As poetic justice, Burke's body was dissected publicly. His skeleton was given to the Anatomical Museum of the Edinburgh Medical School, and his skin was supposedly made into a notebook, which is still on display at the Surgeons' Hall Museum. Following the Burke and Hare scandal, Parliament passed the Anatomy Act of 1832. This law allowed licensed anatomists to use unclaimed bodies from poorhouses, hospitals, and prisons. In practice, this meant the poor, elderly, and mentally ill. Dissection became a punishment, not for crime, but for poverty. In theory, the act ended grave robbing, but it also institutionalized class-based medical exploitation. Many feared dying without family because it meant their body would be claimed by science, not buried. An 1833 protest pamphlet reads, "The rich man is buried with ceremony. The poor man is sent to the scalpel." Even in death, the class divide was absolute. Now, the bodies of the destitute could be dissected without consent, simply because they were poor, alone, and unloved. Many people feared dying in poverty, not just for the hardship, but because their body might be used for medical science against their will. Across the Atlantic, American cities experienced their own grave-robbing crises. In New York, the 1788 doctors' riot was sparked by a gruesome rumor that medical students were stealing bodies from the Negro burial ground in Lower Manhattan. A boy allegedly saw a severed arm dangling from a classroom window and told his father. That night, a mob of over 2,000 people attacked Columbia's medical building. By the end of the week, dozens were injured, and several people were killed. Black cemeteries, potters' fields, and public graves were frequently targeted. Even Mount Auburn Cemetery in Boston and Washington, D.C. burial grounds for freedmen were raided for medical cadavers. Harvard, Yale, and University of Pennsylvania all had documented links to stolen bodies, often from black and immigrant communities. In Virginia, a former slave named Chris Baker was paid by Johns Hopkins Hospital to retrieve bodies from local cemeteries, often from his own community. Let's pause and reflect. Many of the greatest breakthroughs in surgery, anatomy, and disease treatment came from dissection rooms supplied by stolen bodies. Cadavers that were never donated. Corpses ripped from the earth under moonlight. Yes, we've made progress. Today, body donation is regulated, consent-based, and often honored with memorial ceremonies. But the skeleton in the closet of modern medicine is real, quite literally. When you walk the halls of a hospital, when you marvel at the achievements of modern medicine, remember the price that was paid, not just in money, but in dignity. Medicine did not rise on noble intention alone. It rose on a bed of stolen bones, whispered secrets, and midnight crimes. This was the age of the Resurrectionists, and their fingerprints are still on the scalpel. Thank you for watching Dr. Pox's Medical Mysteries. If you found this episode chilling, fascinating, or even a little disturbing, good. That means you're paying attention. Be sure to subscribe for more true medical horror stories from the annals of history. And remember, the past may be buried, but it rarely stays dead.